This episode is sponsored by Smart Travel, a new podcast from NerdWallet. So we've all got them, haven't we? That one friend who always finds the best travel deals, who always picks the right cars for points, and who somehow ends up in first class while you're back in the middle seat in coach. Well, Smart Travel is like that friend, but in podcast form. They cover all things travel finance, like how to book busy season trips without that busy season sticker shock that we all hate, how to avoid paying for upgrades you won't use, and how travel advisors can snag secret perks you didn't even know how to ask for. How useful is all of that. So travel smarter and spend less with help from NerdWallet. Follow Smart Travel wherever you get your podcasts. Armchair-Explorer is a part of the Voyescape podcast network. Check out all of their shows from around the world at voyescape.com.
And I thought, it would be cool to become the first woman to kayak the Amazon, but it is not worth dying for.
Today, we are speaking with world-class kayaker Darcy Gaechter about the highest stakes journey of her life along the most infamous river on Earth. The Amazon flows over 4,000 miles from its source in the Peruvian Andes to the Atlantic coast of Brazil. At some points flat and brown, at others frothing and roaring with whitewater, the Amazon has lured thousands of explorers over the centuries and led many of those to their death. And in 2013, Darcy decided to kayak not just some of it as had been done previously, but the entire length of the Amazon River from source to sea. Her book of this journey is called Amazon Woman, and if you like this story, which I think you will, you can find out more about that, her talks, the expedition she runs, which you can join, and her socials at darcygaechter.com. The link is in the show notes. But first, welcome back to the Armchair Explorer, where the world's greatest adventurers tell their best story from the road. My name's Aaron Miller, I'm a travel writer, and I am thrilled to be here with you guys for a good old-fashioned adventure story. But before we get started, I have a really quick request. It makes such a huge difference to us when you subscribe to the show. So hit that follow button, leave that glowing 5-star review, follow me on social at Armchair Explorer Podcast, or simply tell a friend who you think needs some adventure and escape in their life. If you like the show, if it's inspired you or made you go up, gasp, or scream out loud, spreading the word is a great way to send out a little virtual fist bump to me and bring more of this good stuff to you. And don't forget to check out our new on-location episodes too. This is as close as it comes to being there for real. I'm super excited about them. Everything's recorded on location. So join me in exploring the Rockies of Colorado, the deserts of California, and lots more. All the episodes will be labeled on location so you know what you're getting. But for now, we have some paddling to do. Are you ready? Let's go. How do we know if we're living our best life? Is it measured in achievements, in money, in things? What about friendships? What about memories? What about singular moments of life-changing awe and wonder? And who decides? Is it us or them? The answer isn't always as simple as it seems. We are social creatures. We look to our peers for validation of the paths we choose, to tell us we're doing well, we're okay. But we're also individuals who have the freedom to break norms, to forge new ground, and live, if we choose, a life less ordinary. And we want both those things, don't we? Finding that balance between the mirror of how other people see us and the guiding light of who we want to be is not easy. This is a story about an extraordinary adventure, but it's also a story about finding that balance, about belonging, and about breaking out of the mold. Darcy had long ago figured out that the life she wanted was not the one prescribed for most of us. She'd set numerous records as the first woman to kayak several of the world's most difficult rivers. She'd led expeditions in 18 countries across 5 continents, and she'd established herself as one of the world's most accomplished adventurers. Even in the midst of what many might deem a dream life, things were breaking down.
And as I kind of dug deeper into the sport, it was like, okay, what is the next big challenging river that I could do? And so as I got better and better, the rivers obviously got harder and harder in more remote and faraway places. And I loved it. I still love it. That's kind of what drives me even to this day. But I do at a certain level realize, like, where does this stop? Does it, at a certain point, I have to accept that I've accomplished all I want to accomplish in the sport, or keep sort of foolishly pushing, even though I might be too old now? Like all these questions sort of started forming up, and I still don't have the answers. Many of my friends were getting married, having kids, doing more traditional careers, and I had been running the whitewater kayaking business in Ecuador. Kayaking took up basically all of my time, either doing it for work or doing it for fun. And still have partner now of 21 years, but we're not married. And we were just doing all these weird things that made me, in a sense, feel like an outsider to my society. And a lot of people were good about it and accepted it, including my parents, which I feel very lucky about that. But increasingly, friends had been asking more frequently, when are we going to have kids? When are we going to settle down? When are we going to get real jobs? And at first it was easy to brush that off and say, I don't want those things, stop bothering me. But the more people asked it, the more I really felt, okay, maybe something is wrong with me that I don't want these kind of things. And it wasn't as much a crisis of, oh, I don't like what I'm doing anymore, I have to figure something out. It was more a crisis of, everyone around me thinks that I shouldn't want to do what I'm doing anymore, so what's wrong with me? We all grow up with the idea that you go to school, hopefully you go to college, and then you get a secure job that will allow you to buy a house, buy a nice car, have a retirement savings. You work for 30 or 40 years and then you retire. And that is the path.
She felt as if she was staring into the abyss of her future, as she writes. I'd pushed back against the American ideal that one's net worth is intrinsically tied to one's self-worth, but still, this dogma haunted the recesses of my mind, and a faint voice told me that if this is the true metric, I'm not worth a damn. But then an opportunity tapped her on the shoulder. At the time, more people had walked on the moon than had traveled from source to sea on the Amazon. And of the people who had done it, 5 in total, all of them had descended it via a combination of rafting, kayaking, and hiking. Nobody had attempted to kayak the entire thing. Maybe, she thought, if she just did one last capstone expedition, the biggest, wildest, most dangerous of them all, her thirst for adventure would finally be quenched, and she could drift off into the sunset of the American dream. There were 3 in the party: Darcy, her partner Dawn, also an experienced kayak guide, and a computer programmer called David Midgley, or Midge, who had comparatively little whitewater experience, but whose harebrained idea this whole thing was. The day before she departed, she gave a letter to her friend, which began, "If you are reading this, it's because something went wrong, and I am not coming home from the Amazon."
As we flew into Lima, we landed and I bought a newspaper, and the front page story was about 8 Peruvian colonists that had been murdered by an indigenous group along the Amazon in a place that we would be paddling through. And we knew that a Polish couple who was canoeing down the river had been murdered a couple years before we started, and a South African guy had been shot, but he survived. And so the more sort of research we were doing and evidence we were gathering, really started to sink in how dangerous parts of the trip could be. And I got very scared about going. And I thought, it would be cool to become the first woman to kayak the Amazon, but it is not worth dying for. Like, that was a clear distinction in my mind, where David Midgley, the British guy we were with, he wanted one big adventure in his life, and that became the Amazon trip. And I think on a certain level, he really was willing to die for it. And so I saw our two different attitudes about the trip. And I started on the trip. We were going to have about a month of whitewater in a region that seemed pretty safe to me. So I left on the trip thinking, okay, I'm going to go on the whitewater part, and I'm going to think about this dangerous area. Peru calls it the red zone, and it starts basically where the flat water starts. And we would be in it for about a month. So I'm like, okay, during the whitewater section, I'm going to decide if I feel comfortable going through the red zone or not. I'm going to try to get more information.
Nonetheless, they set off in search of the source of the Amazon, traveling deep into the Peruvian Andes, bouncing along rocky roads past windswept plains dotted with sheep and llamas, the dark twisting shapes of the Andes framing the horizon. There was only one problem. The Amazon is actually not a singular river, but a network of over 1,000 major tributaries, some raging currents, some no more than a gentle stream. Finding the source is not as easy as it seems.
When you stop to think about it, the Amazon River has a drainage basin almost as big as the entire United States. And so figuring out a single starting point for all of that is sort of a big task. Where does one even begin? There has been a lot of argument and debate over it over the centuries, but basically from 1950 until 2012, the whole geographical world agreed that the Apurimac River in Peru was the longest tributary. And that's how the geographers define the source, the longest tributary that flows into the Amazon. And about 6 months before we left on our expedition, a kayaker and neuroscientist named Rocky Contos discovered that the Montaro River was 47 miles longer. So we switched plans kind of at the last minute and decided to go down the Montaro, but we still had to find the beginning of the Montaro, because the Montaro is a pretty big river, but if you trace it upstream, it's got a bunch of small tributaries, and we ended up starting in a lake called Lago Acucocha, and we paddled across the lake, and we left our kayaks because the river feeding the lake was only about 8 inches wide, so not wide enough for kayaks. So we left the boats and we just hiked up this mountainside until we found like the highest flowing point of this river. And there was kind of this big sinkhole that had water in the bottom, and then it had a little outlet, and it was just like a couple inches wide where that came across. And then I have a great photo of Dawn and Midge straddling this little creek, the beginnings of the mighty Amazon. So it's above 15,000 feet in elevation. It was really cold. Our water bottles were freezing solid every night up there. So it was much different than the picture I had in my mind of the Amazon River. It felt really good to get started, after so much planning and preparation and thinking about it, imagining what it would be like, figuring out expectations. It felt really good to get started. But in hindsight, we were so clueless then about everything that we would face downstream, and I do remember thinking then, like, okay, just another kayaking trip. This is great to get going. But yeah, without any real concept of the challenges that lay downstream.
As they set off from this frigid alpine sinkhole, a horde of children ran alongside the banks, cheering as the trio bumped slowly through the trickle of water, barely large enough to fit their kayaks.
The kayaking, the first few days, we were literally in an irrigation ditch, going through the high plains of Peru. And the river slowly built in volume and also in difficulty. And after 6 days, we actually got to the Montaro River. And then maybe on day 8, we started to get into these canyons. And the whitewater started off easy. For the rating scale for whitewater, class 1 is the easiest. Class 5 is the hardest runnable classification. And if something's called Class 6, that typically means it's not runnable. So we had some Class 3, some Class 4. And then about 2 weeks into it, we got to the deepest canyon, and it would take us about 2 weeks to get through this canyon. And we knew that partway down, they were building a dam, a hydroelectric project. But the canyon walls were well over 1,000 feet, and they had been using a lot of dynamite to build a road down to the river. We knew all this before we went. We had met with the project manager that was overseeing the project and asked him to stop dynamiting basically while we paddled through the canyon. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't have survived. So anyway, we had made arrangements with him, and we carried a sat phone with us. And we had GPS coordinates of the project. And when we got to those coordinates, we pulled over, we got out the sat phone, called and said, okay, we're here. Can you stop your dynamite work? And I think it was a 3-mile section. And we had guessed, even worst case scenario, if the rapids were hard, we could probably make it through in 2 hours. So they agreed to stop dynamiting for 2 hours. And we set off and immediately hit this massive rapid where they had blown chunks of the cliff off that were like the sizes of school buses and small houses. And those had all landed in the river, and now the river went underneath all those rocks, not over them. And so for a kayaker, that is a bad situation, like unsurvivable situation. So we had to stop and portage, carry our kayaks around the first rapid, but it was the canyon was so steep walled that we had to rope the kayaks up a cliff and figure out a way to get down. And it took us a full hour just to get around the very first rapid.
This was the deepest and most committing canyon I had ever been in, Darcy writes. It was more frightening than anything I had ever seen. In the rapids, deadly whirls churned beneath boulders with a force that could pull you under, drown you, and never let you go. Slick, vertical walls of bedrock line the canyon with sheer walls towering hundreds of feet above them. Occasionally, the fine powder of dust would come drifting down from worker activity above, like a menacing snowfall, warning of explosions to come. And on top of it all, this was an area prone to natural rockfall, where boulders the size of buses could come careening down the cliffs to splash in the river with no warning. They were barely into the 3-mile stretch, but they had already used half of their allotted time. Worried that at any moment they would hear the boom and sickening crack of dynamite as rocks splintered overhead, they faced an impossible decision. Deadly rapids or impossibly slippery, narrow stretches of bank that could send them tumbling into the water and near certain death.
One of my favorite books is Wallace Stegner's Angle of Repose. And I just remember walking around on this unstable scree field and thinking I really know what he means by that angle of repose right now. And if we move one of these rocks in the wrong way, this whole thing is going to start moving again. Very stressful situation because every rapid we ran felt like sort of a gamble, and every rapid we portaged felt like sort of a gamble because walking around on this unstable dynamited slopes was quite risky. And we finally got to a big rapid where we saw some workers, and it was the first time we'd seen workers. And I think at this point we'd already been in the canyon for 3 or 4 hours, and I was extremely stressed out that because we hadn't seen workers yet, that they also hadn't seen us, and they were going to start back up with their dynamite work.
Waving frantically to the workers, Darcy signaled that they needed more time. A line of heads peered down at them from above, watching anxiously as the kayakers struggled to navigate one final rapid. It looked impossible, unrunnable. A strong hydraulic, as it's known, a place where the water churns in on itself and creates a deadly vacuum, angrily frothed beside a strip of calmer water, barely the width of a kayak, the only safe route around it. But as she looked to the bank to try to skirt around the rapid on foot, the workers above gestured emphatically, drawing their hands across their necks in warning. To go that way to attempt to cross those slippery boulders would be deadly. Impossible or not, they'd have to attempt the rapid.
Very luckily, it was runnable, but it was very hard. So we scouted and found the best line through, and the tricky part was avoiding a huge hydraulic. And a hydraulic is like where the water pours over a rock and reverses back on itself, and it's very easy to get stuck in if you're in a small craft like a kayak. And so as we're descending this rapid, we're all tired. It had been a really long and stressful day, and we peel out to get past this hole, and Dawn and I made it, but Midge just didn't quite have the umph to get all the way around it, and he got stuck in this hydraulic. What immediately started going through my mind was, what are we going to tell his girlfriend? How are we going to get his body out of here? Just the worst went through my mind. We were in 8-foot-long kayaks. On this particular day, I think we had 8 days worth of food and camping gear in the boats with us. So they probably weighed close to 100 pounds. And again, 8 feet long. And when Midge dropped in there, his boat just started cartwheeling like end over end, 8 feet and 100 pounds just getting tossed. Very powerful currents just tossing your boat around, you around. You got to hold onto your paddle tightly so it doesn't get ripped out of your hands. And there's a lot of forces at play. You're just sitting there like yelling, "Get out, Midge, get out, keep fighting." And you just want them so much to stay in their boat, to not have a swim. And yeah, it was truly one of the worst feelings I've had. And of course, when you're in one, you're also thinking, I do not want to swim. I've got to get out of this hydraulic. How am I going to get out in my boat? And, Midge, he had been coming to Ecuador for a decade to train with Dawn and I to be able to build the skills to run the whitewater in the Amazon. And he had done quite a few clinics with Dawn on whole escape techniques where you get out of one of these hydraulics still in your kayak. What often happens, people get stuck and then they have to swim out of their kayak. And usually once you swim, you will get flushed downstream. But so Midge said all of his clinics with Dawn were flashing through his mind. And he thought, okay, I can't get established in this hole. My kayak is cartwheeling. That's a good thing. I'm dynamic. I've just got to keep this energy going in the hopes that, something so dynamic will happen and it will spit me out. And that is what ended up happening. But by some stroke of luck and Midge's skill and miracle, he got out of the hydraulic in his kayak and was able to roll back upright.
Leaving the construction zone, they were forced to navigate a seemingly endless series of Class 5 rapids and slippery banks with roaring drops. At one point, Darcy accidentally dropped her kayak during a portage, and Dawn had to dive straight into the river, risking his life to salvage her boat and supplies. But while dangerous, the physical challenges of running whitewater were familiar to Darcy. It was what came next that really scared her, a part of the river known as the Red Zone. The Red Zone is Peru's #1 cocaine-producing region and the known battleground between the drug traffickers and the military. Illegal logging and the retaliation against it has led to even more deadly conflict. Of the last 6 tourists that had attempted to paddle through this area, half of them had been shot, and a third had died. If the canyon had been the section most likely to kill one of them, the Red Zone was the section most likely to kill them all.
I basically put off the decision so long that one day we paddled into the flat water, and I thought, oh, okay, now we're in the Red Zone, and I didn't make a conscious decision to be here, just my inaction led me to be here. But as we were there, everyone we met was very nice. Nothing felt dangerous about it. We saw motorized canoes full of little kids coming to talk to us, and I just sort of convinced myself, oh, okay, it's not such a bad thing that you're here.
But she could only convince herself of so much. A quote from Joseph Conrad, the author of Heart of Darkness, kept repeating in her mind. I should be loyal to the nightmare of my choice. And as she paddled past riverbanks, hunched and silent, trying to look unassuming, that heart of darkness felt real in a way it never had before.
And so when I read that quote about be loyal to the nightmare of our choices, when later on in the red zone it did start to feel dangerous, I thought, Darcy, you have no one to blame but yourself for this, because by not making a conscious decision, you did make a choice in a sense. And now you're here, and now you have to deal with the consequences of that.
But even more dangerous than the cocaine traffickers and illegal loggers were an indigenous group of people called the Ashanika. Even the military and other people living in the red zone were wary of them, warning Darcy that they didn't take kindly to strangers, and many attacked and killed on sight.
The red zone started along the NA River, and that is primarily where the Ashanika people live. And they have had a tough time for a long time, starting with the Franciscan missionaries who found it so difficult to convert the Ashanika that they ended up going with the practice of kidnapping all the children, basically removing them from their community and culture and putting them in like Franciscan schools, because they basically gave up on the adults but said, if we can take the children early enough, we can save them. So they had that happen. But I guess more important for our time was things that had happened during the lifetime of the people that we met along the river. And that was Peru's Civil War, which is more commonly known as the Shining Path movement. It was started in the highlands by a university professor who wanted to help an uprising of the poor, overthrow the rich people who were in charge. But it's become like this very confusing thing to academics studying it, because it very quickly went from that idea to basically a war against the poor people. Like 70,000 people were killed during this time, and the majority were poor people from the highlands. And the movement eventually made it down to the NA River, and the Ashanika people lost a third of their population from Shining Path terrorists. And so it became very understandable to us why they were so extremely wary of outsiders. They don't know our intentions, they don't know our purposes. And so that's where a lot of the violence had come from. And to their credit, the Ashanika had tried multiple times to go through official channels to kick out the loggers, for example, to stop the drug traffickers. But the government, the police had never done a very good job of being on their side. So they just basically took their safety into their own hands. And so knowing all of this, we did our best to get permission letters in advance from every group that we would pass. We had certain places that we had to check in along the river and show our permission letters, show our passports. And basically, we also had a letter from the Peruvian Ministry of Tourism explaining what we were doing. And so all of this was basically just a way of introducing ourselves and explaining what we were doing.
Then one morning, they spotted a group of about 20 people, waving them down with emphatic gestures and shouts that they couldn't understand. Darcy felt a pit in her stomach. This village was not on their list of official checkpoints, and on a Saturday afternoon, the men were likely to be drunk and perhaps more prone to violence. Similar events had occurred just 2 years prior. But not stopping also felt dangerous. Darcy recalled hearing the story of one paddler who had been chased downriver after sailing past a warning group. He'd been shot more than 6 times, and with bullets lodged throughout his body, he had barely made it out alive. Their guide Caesar, who was accompanying them to act as a translator, said that they must stop. "They are very angry with you," he told them. So they began paddling, as Darcy felt, towards what might be their own execution.
There was, maybe 10 men and a total of 10 women and children kind of standing at the back of the group. And when we first got there, paddling up to them, first of all, we were thinking, okay, are they going to start shooting us at any minute? What are we being idiots by paddling up to them? Everyone has motorized canoes on the rivers, so obviously we couldn't outrun them if they really wanted to track us down. But we got up to them and they started talking to us. They asked us to turn off all of our GoPros. We had spot devices, like the satellite tracking devices on the front of our boats. They wanted to know what those were. And all of this just added to this heightened sense of fear. Like, why do they care if we're recording, if they're not going to kill us? All these questions going through our minds. And then they just start talking to us about all the dangers they face, how important it is as the elders and the men to protect the community, to know about every outsider in their area, to, basically be hyper vigilant to protect people. And the more they talked, the more at ease we started to feel, until towards the very end, when the guy doing most of the talking to us said, well, we're not mad at you guys because you're foreigners and you didn't know the whole situation here, but we had a guy following along with us in a motorized canoe to try to help with situations just like this. And the Ashaninka guy said, but your guide, Cesar, he should have known better, so we're going to have to punish him. And when he said that, any feelings of comfort that we had just drained out, and I could feel, all the blood leaving my face and like, oh, what does punishment mean?
Caesar had traveled in the same area before and had undergone many terrifying searches at gunpoint, vowing never to return. He'd stayed away from the red zone for 9 months, but desperately short on money and with a wife and 3 children to support, he had reluctantly agreed to join them on their journey. Now, Darcy was terrified that in her quest for self-discovery and recognition, she was about to be responsible for his murder.
And then the guy finally announced, okay, as your punishment, you have to do 50 push-ups. And then everyone just started laughing. All the people on the beach started laughing. And I'm thinking, did I understand him right? Because he's speaking in Spanish. And I'm like, did he really just say 50 push-ups? And the fact that everyone was laughing made me feel like, okay, yes, I am understanding him right. It was this crazy, surreal feeling because we went from like totally tense, what are these people going to do to us? Are we all about to die? To laughing with them all and watching this guy try to do 50 push-ups on the beach.
Between their treatment from Franciscan missionaries, illegal loggers, the military, the Shining Path terrorists, and their own government, the Ashaninka had come to believe, understandably, that the only people they could trust were their own. Acting as they did, behaving suspiciously towards visitors, even acting violently, felt like the only way to keep themselves safe. But when they felt like they were understood and listened to and respected, they offered push-ups for punishment, not bullets.
Every place that we did stop where we had to check in, there was always a guy standing at the beach with a shotgun. And that's left over from the Shining Path days where every town, every village has a guard for the day. And that guy would always be very stern and gruff with us as he checked our papers, checked our passports. But as soon as all of that checking was done and he realized who we were, what we were doing, then he would always break out with this huge smile, lead us into town, introduce us to the important people in town. And in many cases, we ended that interaction by sitting and drinking a beer or drinking a Coke with the guard of the day, and just having really funny conversations with people. We were, again, because it's the red zone and it, from an outside perspective, it is a very dangerous place. They don't get very many tourists. And so we were always kind of a big spectacle, and all the kids would come by to see us, and they opened their arms to us. They gave us food. They let us camp on their beaches. And I was always really struck by how beautiful the towns were. Almost every town had their school children paint the walls of the school in like really fun, colorful murals. They all had planted flowers along the streets. And yeah, it was this weird purgatory feeling between this is a really cute, normal feeling town, but just out on the river, there's this constant fear of murder, of robbery, of suspicion. And yeah, it was a very interesting thing to be in the middle of, because that, before we met people, we were the ones people were afraid of. after we met people, we kind of became the center of their universe for that one day. And it's still something I think about quite frequently, and what a weird back and forth it was.
Over the following weeks, they slowly paddled out of the red zone, stopping in at checkpoints, breathing sighs of relief when their papers were cleared, and setting off again to repeat the process. Nights took on a familiar, uniform blur. Darcy and Don's tent was a rustling orange dome of mosquitoes, sand, sweat, and clothes that never managed to dry.
We always tried to get up before the sunrise to go to the bathroom in the morning because the sandflies were voracious there. But if you went to the bathroom before dark, the sandflies were still sleeping in. So that was a thing we had to contend with. And then every morning we'd wake up and boil water to make another dehydrated meal. And it is kind of hard to force yourself to eat Louisiana red beans and rice at 5 a.m, but we had to do it because we needed our energy for the day. And then we'd start kayaking. And yeah, leading up to the expedition, we all really focused on the physical aspects. Like, oh, let's make sure we're in really good kayaking shape. Let's make sure we can do this. But none of us spent very much time thinking about like the mental or emotional challenges. And so I think in a way, when things got hard that way, we were sort of unprepared to deal with it because we hadn't spent a lot of time thinking about it. But those challenges kind of came from a multitude of different things. You know, on the one hand, we were very physically tired. And in the whitewater section, we were kayaking like 8 to 10 hours a day. And, you know, so we're tired. We have like little cuts and things that aren't healing because they're wet all the time. You know, you're sitting in a wet kayak day in and day out and maybe not eating or sleeping quite enough. And so the physical conditions were kind of right to make us a little bit more irritable than we might normally have been. The three of us were spending every waking moment together. We were sleeping 2 feet away from each other. And that's kind of not normal in any situation. And so figuring out ways and strategies to give each other a little space when we recognized that one of us needed it, even though there wasn't that much physical space to give, but just leaving someone alone for a while.
And for somebody like Darcy, who thrives in high-stress situations, navigating the perils of monotony was perhaps the most challenging thing of all.
The whitewater was fun and exciting and stressful and scary, and we had to work as a team to get through that. And then after the red zone, just kind of like boring river, nothing was scary, and we had no real reason to work as a team anymore. So a lot of our energy during that time was spent trying not to kill each other. And the whole journey took us 148 days. So, you know, you can just imagine if you spend that long, 24/7 with anybody, you're going to get irritated on some level. And so managing that became the real challenge during the boring middle months. But there was always something really cool happening. We saw pink Amazonian river dolphins almost every day. We passed cities, towns, and villages almost every day. Fishermen were constantly motoring up to us, trying to sell us fish. I got to play volleyball with all these incredibly talented Peruvian women in these villages that were so tiny. And so even though it was really boring, every single day brought at least one thing that was also really amazing. And I think we all developed different strategies along the way. We really tried to not let ourselves think about the end of the expedition or life outside of the Amazon. Dawn and Midge banned each other from saying hamburger or pizza. If you could control your mind enough to not wish for things somewhere else, it was a lot easier to enjoy where we were.
The Amazon is home to 4 billion trees. It is 20 times the size of the UK and twice as big as India. 10% of the world's known species live here. 20% of the world's oxygen is produced by this forest. 1/5 of the world's fresh water is stored in its basin. Nearly 70 days into the trip, kayaks battered, lips chapped, skins blotted with bites, the groups climbed a bank towards the end of a long day, and for the first time, truly saw the enormity of where they were. a vast, flat quilt of trees stretched as far as the eye could see until it blurred into the green horizon. The rainforest rustled with waxy leaves, clambering monkeys shook loose water droplets above their heads, and cawing birds flashed colorful plumage against the dappled light.
And that view did a couple of things for me. You know, when I first saw it, I just thought, wow, what an amazing place this is. What an unimaginably huge river and ecosystem this is. It was, you know, seeing without end, just green trees and this river snaking through it. But then the second thing that hit me was we weren't even halfway through. We kind of, in a way, hadn't even put a real dent into the expedition. And it was like, oh my God, we still have so much further to go. It was awe-inspiring and a little overwhelming, both at the same time.
And this long stretch of river left an expanse of blank canvas in her mind too, waiting to be filled with those unwanted thoughts and fears she'd tried so hard to run away from. Darcy had been hoping to feel a gradual release throughout the journey, a sense of weight lifting as the heavy yearning for adventure would finally subside, leaving her ready to lead a conventional life, to follow the mirror and let go of the light that had been guiding her for so long. But so far, she hadn't felt that. In fact, she hadn't felt much of anything beyond the day-to-day gruel. She was nearing the end now, and no answers had come. But she had one final challenge left.
The last 3 weeks, or maybe even 4 weeks of the trip, again became very physically challenging because tides come up the Amazon River more than 600 miles, and it was always very windy, and the wind was always blowing upriver. And there is basically no more current. It's just like a giant lake down there. So if we stopped paddling, we would quite literally get blown back up the river. So making miles in that last bit was very hard, and we could only kayak about 6 hours a day with the outgoing tide. And so we had kind of been struggling our way downriver, but we're getting close, and we're in the Para Bay, which is where the Amazon really opens up and gets super wide. And we had decided on the strategy of just staying on the river right, or the southern bank, because at this point, crossing the river could be like a full day ordeal. So we just decided to stay on the river right bank. But a tributary called the Tocantins River comes in and joins the Amazon on that southern bank. And the mouth of the Tocantins was 18 kilometers wide. And so we had to paddle across it. And when we left in the morning, we couldn't see the other bank at all. You know, it was so far that we couldn't even see a tree or anything over there. So we just had to set our compass and account for the wind and the tide. We decided to cross when the tide was coming in because we figured it would be safer to get pushed up the Tocantins River than sucked out into the really wide Para Bay, because there's big ships out in the bay and other things that we didn't want to deal with. So we decided to cross with the incoming tide.
They were fighting hard against beating winds and crashing waves, which slanted into them and pushed them off course. They could barely even keep each other in line of sight as they each bobbed and plunged on 10-foot crests in the fog. Eventually, the tree line on the far shore came into focus, but they were still hours of hard paddling from the safety of the shore.
It was pretty harrowing. It took us 6 hours to do that crossing, and that was 6 hours where we couldn't stop paddling, we couldn't drink water, we couldn't have a snack because it was so rough. There was like 10-foot tall breaking waves and stuff. Yeah, it really forced us to focus and stay sharp and not make any mistakes in there. And then we did eventually make it. We got blown further up the river than we had hoped, but there was a number of little side channels that cut through on the far bank. So we were able to get in a side channel, which was like our only reprieve in this part of the Amazon, because out in the main river, it was always super windy and difficult. But if we could duck into a side channel for a little bit, we could get a break from the wind. There was always people living there. We On this case, we pulled over and took a break, and this little 5-year-old girl gave us mangoes off of her tree outside. And so, yeah, that felt like a huge challenge to overcome and sort of gave us the good extra motivation we'd need for our last week to make it to the ocean at that point.
Nearing the end felt surreal. As they closed in on their final days of paddling, the river seemed to flow faster and the wind blowed harder, pushing them towards their destination. And the more they raced towards the sea, the more narrow the window for Darcy's revelation became. As the hours bled past, she waited for the moment, that flash, that feeling of contentment that she had lived that life, achieved everything she wanted in kayaking, and was now ready to settle down and join the tribe. But it never arrived. And then one morning, they awoke damp and itchy and stinging from a night spent in rocky puddles to the sound of birdsong. They were only 10 miles from the ocean. They'd done it. Darcy had kayaked from source to sea the entire length of the Amazon River.
It was a really interesting feeling because I had been imagining the moment really since before we started the expedition. And certainly along the way, at every low point, I would try to imagine what it would feel like to succeed. And that would kind of help me keep going through these low points. And when we got there, when we finally made it, at first it felt really amazing. We landed our kayaks on this white sand beach overlooking the Atlantic Ocean, and there was not another human in sight. We watched the sunset, and it was like, wow, we have done this truly amazing accomplishment. And I would say that feeling lasted about 5 minutes. And then the next feeling was like, oh crap, what are we going to do tomorrow? And I just realized that for 5 months, our lives had been hyper-focused on one goal that dictated everything we did. Wake up, eat calories, paddle to the Atlantic Ocean. And without that purpose of life, it felt extremely empty.
During those 5 months, Darcy had been able to hold the reality of her conventional future at arm's length, putting it off until she had finally achieved her goal. But now, sitting on that beach, the wide open expanse of the Atlantic before her, soul-whipping tears from her eyes, she realized with sudden flooding certainty that she had already answered her question, just not in the way that she'd hoped.
Paddling downriver again in the boring parts where I was trying to occupy my mind with something, I would think through all these socially acceptable careers that I might have. And I had settled on a few that I could deal with. And that's truly how I thought about it. Like, I could deal with doing that. But then I realized, why would I try to do something that I can just put up with? Why not do something that I really love doing? And so that was sort of going through my mind as we paddled down the river. And then after we finished, our ending point on the Atlantic Ocean was kind of far away from civilization. So the next morning after finishing, we did actually have to get up and go kayaking again. This time we had to kayak back up the river, which because of the wind was infinitely easier than kayaking down the river had been for the last few months. But we paddled about 30 miles to the closest town, and we got out at that town, and we ended up getting driven across this peninsula in a dump truck. And so us and all of our kayaks are loaded in the back of this dump truck. It's an amazing Amazonian downpour, and we're just sitting in this increasingly growing dirty puddle in the back of this dump truck. And oddly enough, it was in that moment where I thought, why would I do anything other than this? And I just felt incredibly lucky for the places I had been, the things I'd seen, the people I'd met. And I thought, why would I trade this for sitting inside doing what other people want me to do? And it was a great moment of clarity, kind of a nice giving myself permission to say, screw it, I'm going to keep doing what I want to do.
In her book, Darcy includes a quote from author James Baldwin. My father wanted me to come home, as he said, and settle down. And whenever he said that, I thought of the sediment at the bottom of a stagnant pond. Her fear of being rejected and judged and pressured to conform was powerful. But in the end, even more powerful was her fear of not living a life that she herself chose. For Darcy, that meant a life on the water, a life of bug bites and freeze-dried meals, a life of risk and danger and rainforest views, of impossible currents, exhaustion, and ultimately triumph. That was what made her feel truly alive. That was her light, and she was finally ready to embrace it and ride that river wherever it would take her.
It feels amazing because you have this immensely powerful force, a river with a lot of water, a lot of gradient, a lot of rocks, and it just, from an outsider's perspective, looks so chaotic and sort of impossible to navigate. But, if you have a lot of experience and you can figure out a way to put yourself in that environment in a way that feels somewhat safe, it's really an amazing feeling, both exhilarating, but also like making yourself part of this something much bigger, this huge, awesome, powerful source. If you're not doing it well, it can feel pretty horrible. I think a lot of people get turned off of the sport of kayaking because if you mess up and you flip over, then you're just trapped upside down in this little plastic boat. And that is very understandably and not a feeling that many people like or can get comfortable with. And so, sometimes it can feel like, what am I doing here? I'm the stupidest person alive, putting myself into this danger and chaos. And then, 5 minutes later, it can feel like, I'm the most amazing superhuman alive. This feels amazing. So it's like an emotional roller coaster.
We are all driven to belong, to be part of the tribe. But not everybody fits in the same way. We want a life rich with purpose and meaning. That too is in our DNA. But that meaning can't be prescribed. It must be sought and found, and sometimes wrestled with and fought for.
Yeah, I think it can be extremely difficult getting started on any kind of goal, big or small. The Amazon is obviously quite a big thing to undertake, but even I've found when I am setting small goals, sometimes it's like the getting started part that is the most difficult. And I just feel like for people, once you've identified something you want to do, which that can be one of the most challenging parts for people, but once you've identified it, you've just got to find a way to shove yourself off the edge, to get started. And I really take the attitude of who cares if you succeed or fail? That's not the important part. I think when we look back on our lives, we're not going to beat ourselves up for failures or really congratulate ourselves for successes. We're going to sit there and think, I'm so glad I tried that, instead of having regret for not.
Darcy's story reminds us of that fundamental truth. Life is fleeting and precious, so you better live it for yourself. It takes courage to do that, but all the best things do. It reminds us that you can be part of the tribe, even as you test its boundaries, that you can walk your own path and still belong. It reminds us that you can be the mirror and still listen to that voice within. Thank you so much, Darcy. Thank you for sharing this amazing story with us. Her book of this journey is called Amazon Woman, and it's available now wherever you get your books. You can also learn more about Darcy on her website, darcygaechter.com, and connect with her via Instagram and Facebook at Darcy Gaechter. If you love kayaking and river stories, be sure to check out our episode with George Bullard, kayaking from Greenland to Scotland across the most dangerous stretch of ocean on the planet. It's one of my favorites. Also, Oscar Scafidi dodging hippos in Angola's Kwanza River is a really fun one. Or for something truly epic, Ed Stafford's tale of walking the entire length of the Amazon River, walking it, not kayaking. If you think this was hardcore, wait until you listen to that. I'll link to all those in the show notes or just search on this feed now. So thank you so much for listening, guys. And don't forget, if you do like this show, please share it with your friends. Connect with us on Instagram and Facebook at Armchair Explorer Podcast and follow us wherever you get your shows. It makes a huge difference. So thank you so much for anything you can do. And don't forget to check out aptpodcaststudios.com to find more of their awesome shows. So excited to be part of that team. So until next time, keep taking that plunge and keep following your light wherever it may lead. Because the more we look for wonder in the world, the more the wonder of the world becomes a part of who we are. Dare to be truly alive. This podcast was produced by Armchair Productions, the audio experts for the travel industry. Armchair Explorer is a part of APT Podcast Studios. Jenny Allison wrote and co-produced the show along with me, and Charles Tyree did the audio editing and sound design. I'm Aaron Miller. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.
Travel doesn't always go to plan, and that's where the best stories live. Welcome to the Winging It Travel podcast, where you don't just hear about travel, you feel it. I'm James Hammond, and I'm podcasting my own journeys from the road, sharing immersive soundscape episodes that drop you right into the moment, from busy streets to remote mountains. Along the way, I sit down with local people and fellow travelers to tell honest stories about life, culture, and chase an adventure beyond the routine. No filters, no fake perfection, just stories to tell, tips to share, and experiences to inspire. Search Winging It Travel Podcast on any podcast app, and let's wing it.
Hi, I'm Mike Siegel, and man, oh man, do I love talking about travel. You think I'd get enough of it touring the world as a stand-up comedian, or just going off on my own personal adventures around the world? No, when I get home, I still have to talk about it. That's how much I love travel. So every week I sit down with a friend, a travel expert, influencer, expat, or anyone from any walk of life who shares my passion for travel. So if you want to hear a fun, casual, off-the-cuff chat about travel from people who love it, listen to the Travel Tales podcast with me, Mike Siegel, wherever you get your podcasts.